I never took myself so seriously, you know. I think that life must be a cosmic joke in a certain sense, so we shouldn't take ourselves so seriously. At the same time, I've always been very scrupulous with everything I do. So when I found your work, it was crazy because I thought in a certain sense that it seemed like I had written it, you know, like I recognized myself so deeply in it that it seemed like I had written it. And since then I have dived, this is not like the correct verb, but I have dived into your work for this last 17 years, and I am deeply grateful for what you have done. It serves me a lot, and it has served a lot of people for whom I have introduced this work in Brazil. And so this takes me to like when we talked on the internet, and you were like, okay, I have cancer now, and I'm okay with that. Please don't worry. It's like I'm completely in peace with the situation. You think that obviously this has to do with this whole life that is dedicated. In a certain sense, I think that spirituality is like preparing yourself to die, or preparing yourself for death, in a certain sense, or coming to terms with our own mortality. But like the choice of not going through a intense treatment or chemotherapy, would you mind talking about this a bit? Why you choose this?
Quality of life to me has always been paramount over quantity of life, meaning quantity of how many years I can live. It doesn't really make sense to me if my quality of life is not very high. Mm-hmm. So I've lived a very high quality life for a long time, and I've become accustomed to that. My nervous system has become accustomed to that. My physical instrument, my life experiences have all been guided by a process of realizing most of my dreams. And so I've lived a very fulfilling life. My life I don't feel I've lived a frustrated life. I feel a fulfilled life. And you mentioned being at peace. This is the reason I feel at peace with myself, as I've been at peace with my mind and my life for a long time. It's not just now that I'm at peace. The peace simply deepens. And it's really the result of having most of my dreams have come true. So I have lived a life of fulfilled dreams. And you see, the majority of my dreams have never been materialistic. I've never had dreams of becoming rich and famous, or having a big car, or having really expensive clothes or things like that. It's all been about the dream of becoming published as an author, the dream of writing plays for theater, and having the audacity to go out and audition actors and create the illusion of enough confidence for they have belief in me, so we create a theater together. And also the same with the films. Long-standing dream of making movies until I started doing it. I mean, I had the dreams, for a long time before actually making my first film. So it's all been about living the art life for me, and doing exactly what I intended to do. As early as when I first discovered my reason for living, which would have been around the age of 17 or so. And I realized back then that I wanted to figure out how to get by, how to survive without having to give in to the 9-to-5 job schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that the true value of my life, the currency of my life, the currency of my life was not money, it was time. So the time of my life meant more to me than money, and much, much more. So, you know, all throughout my 20s, it was really about making an art out of poverty so I can live with less, but have completely my own time. And that was when I was able to write and direct. That's my big experimental theater phase. Throughout my 20s, I was producing a series of experimental theater productions, as well as my punk rock band in 1980, and the Frozen Beauties is what they were called. It was just one fantasy and dream after another of realizing it, and this carries a momentum.
Yes.
So it didn't stop, it kept going on, and so I've been, in a sense, creating non-stop for about 50 years, but I've had to learn how to live a certain way, think a certain way, have a certain attitude, certain ways of seeing the world that enable me to stay creative.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a kind of discipline in a way of life that I cannot recommend to anybody else. I can't teach anybody else how to do it. It's very personal to me. But this is why I'm at peace.
Okay. That's inspiring. That's inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it is. It's living an inspired life has allowed me to act as a inspiration to others, and that's been very important to me.
Yes, I can relate to that a lot.
Yeah. From the age of about 17 to about 25, I was in the process of being trained and performing and teaching a particular form of mime theater. And this is a mime theater that was originated in New York City by a fellow named Paul Curtis, who's no longer alive, but his school is there. It's called the American Mime Theater. I did not go to that school. I was trained by one of Paul's proteges, Keith Berger, at a very early age. Keith and I are the same age. We went to elementary school and junior high and high school together, childhood friends. And in his first year with the mime theater, he came back to LA, where we lived at the time, and he shared some of these methods and techniques, and I just completely magnetized towards it and decided, okay, this is what I want to do in my life. I want to perform and learn this medium, this mime theater. It's a very physical form. It's nonverbal mime. It's not like French. It's not like cute mime, not with the white face. It's more dramatic, more like a combination of Stanislavski method acting and modern dance, something of a hybrid. And I took to it very well, and I got pretty good at doing a few things very well in it, and was able to perform and get paid for doing it, and encouraged by audiences and so forth. And I had achieved a high level of mind over matter, meaning a very high level of being able to impose control over my physical instrument, and to a pretty high degree. So it's a medium where the performer controls the communication and is in complete charge of their physical instrument and they determine how and where they're going to move every single moment to moment. High level of self-determination in the movement signature. Then in 1977, I was 25. I met up with this fellow named David Rosenblum, who was an artist, also at the time a practicing clairvoyant, musician and painter. And he was running some experiments with a group of psychics, I mean a group of individuals who were in training for a kind of psychic ability of reading auras and being able to come to know themselves as energetic bodies, sort of what I was talking about in the beginning. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's not just the physical body, but the energy body. And so he was working with a group, and he asked me to join them. He knew I was performing and I was doing mime. He says, "Why don't you join us?" And this is where he introduced certain principles that continued in my development of paratheater, principles of no form, principles of polarity is what he introduced. But the experience of no form was for me extremely difficult, because in order to honestly enter the state of no form, of cultivating this kind of profound internal receptivity, I had to relax my desire to control. So the whole skill set of being a mime was under question, because it was all about not relaxing the desire to control, but increasing control to a very high level. So I had a lot of frustration with the no form, and I was just wondering, I don't know how to do this, what's going on? But there was a particular moment where it broke through, meaning the experience overwhelmed me, and I just fell to the floor laughing, realizing that that I actually didn't have the control I thought I did, and that I was opening up to a much larger dimension of creativity than the one dictated by my intellect. Move this way, hold this tension, release this moment, So I was now exploring a whole different dimension and direction of experience through movement and making sound that I had not experienced in mime at all. So we worked with these processes for about 6 months, a small group, maybe half a dozen, 6 or 7 of us. And then it was over. It disbanded. But I wasn't done, so I wanted to continue, but I realized that there was something I needed to integrate from my mime process into this new direction. Somehow I had to find the synthesis or some integration of the two, even though they were like oil and water, mm-hmm. that there had to be some way I can bring them together. And the main beginning point was designing a physical warm-up, because working with this no-form process, there was no physical warm-up. We just kind of got into the room, maybe we stretched a little bit or jumped up and down, but there was no dedicated physical warm-up. And in the mime theater, there always was. And so that became part of the beginning of process of developing this new medium, was to start with a dedicated physical warm-up of going through 4 different stages of feeling the body deeply through stillness, through flexing the spine, through stretching, and through generating enough heat to break a sweat. Later on, maybe 20 years later, I added a 5th component of work in the core, so it became later on a 5-phase physical warm-up.
Where no form and the physical warm-up kind of came from when you were like developing this work, and where did you got conscious projection from? I know it comes from Jungian from a kind of a Jungian background. Have you ever had Jungian therapy? Have you ever been in therapy? And where does it come from?
The conscious projection is a name for a method of becoming aware of basically a previously unconscious psychological or psychic reflex. So this notion of projection, I have, it comes from my own observation of interactions with people, in myself and with others. The way I've come to see it is that people are projecting all the time, projecting authority, projecting power, projecting the dream lover, projecting fear, projecting scapegoats. So there's all kinds of projection, psychic projection that's happening for the most part unconsciously. And yet it has a very big impact on a person's life to, whether they're projecting, their shadow aspects of their own self, the thing that they fear the most about themselves, and they're projecting it on another race of people, whether their skin is darker than theirs, or whether, they're of a different religious persuasion or whatever, that it has a big effect on themselves and the people they project onto. And yet it often happens just unconsciously, like they're on automatic pilot. And I thought, what would happen if you did it on purpose, if you just simply focus on the intention of projecting a particular energy into an area, just to do it on purpose? Can you tap into the reflex that was already happening on an unconscious level? And it turned out, yeah, you can. Once you start doing it on purpose, I'm going to, on purpose, intentionally project into a certain area of the floor. Maybe it's a corner of the room or a circle that I've drawn on the floor. The quality, the conditions, and the energies of the shadow aspect of my nature, the things that I fear and dread the most about myself. Oh, there it is, it's in there. And I do it on purpose, and then I enter that area and subject myself to that experience that I put there. And surprise, surprise, something happens, and I am under the influence of my own projections and coming into a more direct knowledge of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of my own projections, and discovering the nature of that, how it feels, my responses to that while I'm in it, and then escaping that, going back into no form, leaving the shadow projection behind, going back into receptivity, letting shadow go. And so this is how the method of conscious projection was born. It's simply, being aware of how unconscious projection happens all the time, and just experimenting, what would happen if I did it on purpose. And so that's how that came about. The other thing too is that there's quite a few kind of unconscious behaviors and activities that people are involved with on a daily basis. One of them is a kind of domesticating impulse of, those desires and deeper needs of transforming a house into a home. How does each individual arrange the place where they live so that they feel at home there? It wasn't a home to begin with. They had to make it a home. What is the energy that they bring into the room? They may arrange the furniture, but there's also something else there. They infuse the area with a certain sense of solace, a sense of safety. They feel safe here. Well, the place didn't come with a built-in sense of safety. They brought the sense of, I feel safe here. So that's a projection of the sense of safety into the room. And this begins the process of domesticating making a house into a home, a place where we can find shelter, both physically but also psychically, psychic shelter. So then that can be converted into a ritual method in the process of entering a workspace, and how do you move in the workspace to bring a sense of safety into the workspace, not just for yourself but for the other people. So how to make the space safe to be in. So the projection of the sense of safety, of sanctifying the space as sacred or as a safe place to be. So people can make that, they can do it on purpose. And then also there's the territorial instinct, again, which is for the most part unconscious. Doing that on purpose as a ritual method within the space that you've made safe, you find some area that you can call your own, that you kind of designate, okay, this is my space within the larger space. And then you go about your own kind of idiosyncratic movement, your own kind of way of owning that space, making it yours. So this is really you incorporating the very powerful territorial animal instinct of claiming that space as your own. And so that becomes another process of consciously doing something on purpose that started unconscious. Mm-hmm. Another way of, in a sense, making the unconscious conscious, mm-hmm. which is a big part of what happens in paratheater all across the board. This process that actually Jung introduced it through the term active imagination, and which he, I think, defined as almost any process of making the unconscious conscious through the faculty of imagination. Of course, we do that in through a more visceral, physically active, somatically dynamic expression of active imagination. So it's not done, laying on the couch where the psychotherapist is, there, sitting next to you, whispering, in your ear about things. So it's the principle of active imagination, but it's applied to a somatic discipline of mm-hmm. Visceral and vocal expression of active imagination.
And had you ever been in Jungian therapy or something like this, or it was just ideas that you were that were hovering in your mind in a certain sense, like circulating around you, and you picked them?
I had tried Jungian therapy for maybe a few sessions, and I don't know if it was the therapist or just the methods or the time of life I was in. I didn't find it compelling or of much use mm-hmm. to me, and I think part of the reason again was because what I was learning in the paratheater process, in a sense, acted as a therapeutic influence in my own life at the same time. And the more I got into the processes of paratheater, the more I started reading Jung, and the more I started seeing correlations between many of his insights and directives and his ideas seemed to mirror some of the experiences and methods that we were going through in the paratheater process. Through the paratheater work, there have been countless opportunities for exploring multiple dimensions of my personality, or even of archetypes like the shadow, the anima, the animus, the hero, so forth. And also to confront my own weaknesses, areas where I am how can I put it, maybe at some point earlier on, maybe I was ashamed of parts of myself where I felt I was not a good person, or these kinds of things. So over the years, having been exposed and confronting so many dimensions of myself, I simply agreed to not exclude anything, to include everything. And this is what I mean by radical self-acceptance. And in that radical self-acceptance has come about a profound self-support system that has enabled me to move forward without seeking confirmation from others for things that I pretty much already know. Part of the process for me has been I'm very diligent about reality checking my perceptions, because I personally want to know the difference between what I'm projecting and what I'm perceiving. Mm-hmm. This kind of transformative ritual work, like many other kinds of transformative ritual work, because there are many different kinds in the world. Different cultures have their own ritual traditions. There are dangers, or let's say disturbances that can occur in any transformative process where the conscious ego is flooded by the contents of the subconscious. And then the conscious ego becomes inflated. It could become negative inflation where the personality becomes mean or cruel to themselves. They don't like themselves. They're loathing of themselves. So that's a negative ego inflation. Mm-hmm. Positive ego inflation would be they are thinking they are better than anybody else. They are experiencing some sense of entitlement and big ego mm-hmm. kind of thing. So these kinds of things I think are part of any process of whether it could be therapy, it could be certain creative processes, certain ritual processes, where there is this confrontation with the self over and over and over again. And this is also, I think, why this work is not for everybody. This is not a mainstream direction at all, but this is a direction for individuals for whom their integrity and autonomy are a source of excitement for them. Mm-hmm. That they are excited by mm-hmm. knowing their truth. They're excited by the prospect of full-on commitment to their truth, full-on commitment to their own subjectivity, so that they are not. They have gotten past that kind of doubt, like, oh, if something's subjective, it might not be legitimate. Mm-hmm. It's just me. Mm-hmm. Well, the peculiar thing about this subjective experience is that what I've discovered is that in the initial stages, it's very sloppy and it's very self-indulgent and it's very, okay, I experience ecstasy and rapture and I've experienced the great meaning of life and so on and so forth. And you're just in your own head, and this is part of the subjective experience in the beginning phases. However, if you have the wherewithal to fully commit to the heart of your own subjective experience and continue moving through the heart of that experience over and over and over again, so you just persist through your own subjectivity, at some point there is a breakthrough, and that point is unpredictable. There's no way to know when it's going to come, but there is a point where the subjective begins leaning into objectivity, mm-hmm. where what was once just a personal experience, once you're able to share it and articulate it in a way that's clear and simple, then you find resonances with other individuals who say, hey, I experienced that too. Mm-hmm. And then you realize, oh, it's not just me. I have somehow tapped into something larger that is involving something universal, but I only discovered it by being true to my own experience first and having faith that it's going to go somewhere and not doubt it just because it's my experience. Mm-hmm. And this is going against the grain of the public education system. Mm-hmm. Universities, yes. that they have a problem with subjectivity. Mm-hmm. they have an exaltation of the objective truth. Journalism, whatever. And it's like, what that? You know, what the hell is that? What? No bias? I don't think so.
What do you even mean by that? You know?
Right, exactly. And, you know, there is a bias. You know, every, you know, journalist worth their salt understands bias, and they know, you know, there's a bias to every news story, even though it pretends to have no bias. It's coming from somewhere, some point of view, some, you know, agenda, oftentimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, the radical self-acceptance, bringing about a self-support system that engenders its own kind of confidence. This is not a confidence of kind of blind arrogance. It's just simply a confidence that's been earned through the audacity of not turning any part of yourself away. It's an audacious move to take it all in, and to not exclude anything. Just, you know, so you begin gradually to be at peace with the best and worst of yourself, and so there's no reason for defense. You know, someone said, "Well, what about this and this?" I go, I know that.
Also that shit.
I've been there, done that. You know, and, oh, you're so wonderful. Well, whatever. You know, I've been there, done that. Whatever. And so it's not such a big deal anymore. You just so it allows you simply to be yourself more in more different situations. You know, so you can be yourself anywhere with anyone.
I wanted to know, this is kind of a history in a certain sense, but there's also something about ParaTheater in this, that like your relationship to Sylvie is, I understand that is something which has been a place of creation in multiple senses. Not only of like this life that is shared. I've seen the excerpt you read from the book on YouTube, it's very beautiful. But at the same time, like concretely creating a lot of art together. And I wanted to know if in any way like this relationship has transformed or shaped the way you work within the ParaTheatrical medium, and how does like voice and singing, what is the power of it inside the ParaTheater, and how does Sylvie has helped you in any way to get closer to this?
Yeah, Sylvie had a breakthrough in her ParaTheater process in 2005, and she had only been doing the work for maybe 5 years at that point. And the breakthrough came through singing. She had already started singing, but there was something that happened in a particular lab we called the Embodied Voice Lab, where we were experimenting with combining movement with voice in a kind of organic way, so that the movement produced the voice, the sound, the vocalizations, and the vocalizations produced the movement. So there's an interaction between voice and movement throughout the entire 3-month lab. And through that entire three-month lab, this was a lab where I intentionally chose 10 individuals, including myself, so 9 plus myself, whose ancestry came from different parts of the world, because they had to choose a song from their ancestors that they would practice for the whole 3 months. So that song would be the only thing that they would be singing for all 3 months, twice a week. So we were going to break that song open and find the energy sources that emerge, how that song began, why that song was sung in the culture, how that song acts on the body and movement. So we just really opened up the song quite a bit. And Sylvie, from the Deep South, so she chose a white, what's called a white spiritual. I think it was what was it? Anyway, the song that she chose, she found a way into the song and a way into moving from the song that completely transformed her voice, brought her voice down more into her gut, and also into her backside, and so the quality and tone of her voice was transforming. She had not heard, nobody had heard her true voice until that lab, and so she had a major breakthrough. And as a result of that, her singing developed incrementally over the years. She became much more, her sense of talent and skill as a singer just really took off, and she was on a runway of really producing a series of albums, many CDs, I think 5 or 6 CDs over the next 10 years or so. And also soundtrack work on my film she would contribute music for. And as a result of that, also the vocal work in the ParaTheater process after Sylvia's breakthrough became much more prevalent, because then she began introducing methods that she developed as a result of her experimentation to the rest of the group. And so she started co-facilitating around 2010 for 5 years, and really into Portland, and for the next 8 years she was co-facilitating labs with me, focusing on developing the vocal talents and skills of the participants. So she had a kind of a profound influence on the ParaTheater work.
Okay, and how and what would you say is like it's the power of voice, or is the importance of voice inside this work? Given the history that you gave now, let's talk about like the subjective experience or the adjustments that could be made.
Well, there's something about singing. You can only tell the truth when you're singing. It's a very sincere expression of the heart. And so there are individuals, I kind of fell into this category for a little while, where I said, I don't know how to sing, I can't sing, my voice is bad, all these excuses, right? But it was more about just not wanting to be vulnerable. Just being afraid of sounding bad or getting off key or something like that, or some silly vanity, right? So I got over that, and I started singing more, and so the power of voice in ParaTheater is really the power of the heart, and the integration of a more heartfelt expression of not just voice, but once the heart opens up, once you're able to sing openly and freely, the rest of the body follows. The rest of the body wants to also sing with the voice, so it becomes an embodied voice process. And I think that's probably the most simple and direct way I can describe the power of voice in the ParaTheater work, is it brings about a greater sense of embodiment in general, overall, of the energies and the experiences. That's probably the most I can say about it. Yeah.
Okay.